What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. What is the percentage chance that D'Angelo Russell is a Laker in 2 weeks?
I'd put it at around 40%. So more likely than not that he's traded. Again, we've discussed this multiple times. Like, let's go back to the offseason. That D'Lo contract was structured to be traded. He waived his de facto no trade clause, which was a new stipulation in the new CBA. And the Lakers signed that with the thought of this is, we can keep him, of course, and see how the season goes, see how he plays, see how things fit together. But with him having a player option on that second year, it's not this albatross contract where you're committing, a bunch of money to D'Lo and you can't move it. But the thing I've been trying to convey, because I know D'Lo and Austin naturally get pitted against each other within the fan base. I see it on a nightly basis. Anytime I tweet anything, it's always like, well, why not trade Austin or why trade D'Lo? And one thing that I think people have to remember is the Lakers are kind of in a lose-lose proposition right now with D'Lo with his contract, because in having a player option for next season, $18.7 million, either he's opting in because he doesn't have a market, and maybe the season hasn't gone as well. He progresses a little bit, or he has another rough postseason series, and now all of a sudden he's looking at the market. There's just not really a clear suitor for him, so he opts in. And then in that case, it's not the the worst case scenario, but necessarily, but it is like, okay, now we have a guy who probably isn't worth the money that we're paying him, or like he opted in because there wasn't a market. This isn't a great asset for us. Or option two is D'Lo continues playing like this for the rest of the way. Lakers keep him, and now all of a sudden there are several teams looking at him as, okay, D'Lo has put it together. He's been consistent for a large stretch of a season. Maybe he had a good first round series or whatever. And now it's like, okay, well, if you're the Lakers, you either have to pay him for multiple years and probably give him a solid raise, or you risk losing him for nothing. And then you had this asset that you could have flipped at the trade deadline, but now you've lost him and you have really no way of replacing him given the other salary you've already committed. So to me, sure, there is a middle ground where D'Lo just ends up staying and he plays really well. But that to me is a little bit of a fantasy land. It's either he's playing really well and he's opting out and you're probably losing that asset, or having to really commit to just LeBron, AD, D'Lo, Austin. That's our core. And as we're discussing, I don't know if you can really win with that foursome together, or again, you are now, having him opt in as a potentially, negative asset. So for the Lakers, again, this was a contract that was designed to be moved. It was supposed to be a tradable mid-sized contract that you could pair with another one, like say a Rui Hachimura or a Gabe Vincent, or just one kind of separate for, again, a DeJounte, a Bruce Brown, one of those guys making like 18 to 22 million. So to me, for people kind of wondering why D'Lo and not Austin, Austin has 2 more years, and it's a very team friendly, he's making about $26 million total over the next couple of years. And to compare that to potentially having to pay D'Lo 20 plus million next year if he opts out, even if you think D'Lo is a better player, he's not worth double Austin Reaves. And that's how the Lakers view it. And that's kind of the tricky spot they're in right now with D'Lo, where, again, it was designed to be traded. And that's ultimately why I think it's more likely than not that he is moved by the deadline.
I'm so glad you broke that down, because I think that's a really, really important piece of information for Laker fans to understand. It is not just a straight up basketball conversation between Austin and D'Lo. There are real cap implications. I want to give my 2 cents, but I want to ask this question first because I think it kind of relates to the two. So let's talk about Austin Reaves real quick. What is the percentage chance that Austin Reaves is a Laker in 2 weeks?
I'd put it at about 95%, which is really high. And everything I've heard, Jeannie Buss loves him. And And again, as we talk about with
It
Darvin,
matters.
like if you have the if you have the approval of the owner, that goes a long way. There's also a sense of he's the latest Laker discovery. The Lakers pride themselves on their scouting department and finding these hidden gems late in the first round, second round, undrafted. So to have Austin, I mean, look, this guy was just named a finalist for the Olympic team and obviously played for Team USA over the summer. Like, and there's a reason why every conversation the Lakers have, one of the first asks is, we want Austin Reaves, like, put Austin Reaves in this deal. They're not saying that about D'Lo. And I know, again, I think D'Lo has been the better player for the last couple of weeks. You could argue that in the aggregate of the entire season, D'Lo has had the better season. But just from a league-wide perception perspective, Austin has a much better league-wide approval rating compared to D'Angelo Russell. And that's even taking out the contracts, all that stuff, just like how they are viewed as players. Austin is viewed as a winning player, whereas D'Lo is much more polarizing. So I think from that perspective of having a guy under contract for at least 2 more years, it's a homegrown talent who, I mean, LeBron loves him. LeBron can't speak highly enough of Austin. Well-regarded teammate, beloved in the locker room. All those facts, and then of course he's a fan favorite, and he's super popular. He's just one of those guys that he moves the needle, and I don't know how much you factor that in, but he is someone who is a very popular player, and I think for the Lakers that matters to some extent. So I think from my understanding, it would have to be a clear-cut third all-star level guy like a Lauri Markkanen. If Utah's putting Lauri Markkanen on the table, the Lakers can get in that conversation. Sure, they would consider throwing in Austin Reaves in that situation. Or if it's maybe one of these bigger deals where they're getting back 2 or 3, high level starters or rotation guys, and Austin is kind of the difference in it, they would consider it in that scenario. But really, I just don't see that playing out that way. I think a lot of fans, despite some fans starting to kind of sour on Austin, I think a lot of people would be upset if they traded him again, given the contract. Like, to me, that's one of the best role-playing contracts in the league, considering the next couple of years of how much they're paying him. So I think Austin is going to be a Laker past the deadline. It's really D'Lo, Rui, Gabe. Those are the 3 names to watch.
Yeah, I think like both Austin and D'Lo have had multiple phases where they've struggled this year. And I think a big part of that is their own redundancy. Like, it's like, oh, Austin's hasn't been playing super well in the last couple of weeks. It's like, yeah, and guess who has been? D'Lo. Like that this is kind of how this works in a lot of cases. Like when you're a skill guard and there's another skill guard on the team, and so there, the ball kind of has to be in your hands in a certain way for you to impact winning or I should say, put up the numbers that you're accustomed to. Like, of course, there's going to be an ebb and flow there. To me, there are 3 reasons why D'Angelo Russell is the obvious guy to trade instead of Austin. One, you mentioned the contract, just from the standpoint of salary filler. Austin makes $12 million this year. So if you want to go get a really good player, you've got to give up Austin and more. Whereas D'Angelo Russell makes more than $17 million this year. It's just a little bit easier to match salaries with them. Secondly, the contract is just better for the future of the Lakers. It's like you mentioned, it's a discounted deal for a high quality role player in this league. So to be honest, like it just makes more sense to use D'Lo, because you might end up using Austin in a trade down the line to go get a better player. Or like you might have a point 3 years from now where you're really glad that Austin makes what he makes as you're building a certain type of roster around him and Anthony Davis, right? And then the last piece, it's really this simple to me. Every game during the playoffs last year, you wanted Austin on the floor for any sort of important moment. With D'Lo, it depended on the night. Some nights you were like, oh man, like he saved our ass against Memphis in game 4, Some not, there were a couple Warriors games in there too where he looked really good. But then there were these others where you're like, oh, D'Lo doesn't have it tonight. You got to get him off the floor. He's downright destructive to us right now. That was what it was like. And so like Austin, I call it like matchup resiliency. Like Austin is just capable of being on the floor in those 5-man groupings against more different types of playoff opponents. And so when you combine those 3 things, it makes it pretty simple and straightforward from that standpoint. And you're right, like Lakers fans have just kind of pitted the 2 of them against each other, and they're both really good basketball players who do very different things. I know they're both skill guards, but even within that context, they're very different. right? Like, I mean, even just D'Lo's way, way better off the ball, I think, or on the ball, I mean. I think Austin is a better connector off of LeBron and AD than D'Angelo Russell is. So like, there's all these like different kind of elements between the two of them, and they're kind of stepping on each other's toes a bit. And you need upgrades at the 2 and 3. D'Angelo Russell is just kind of like collateral damage there in a lot of ways. And like, I almost feel bad for D'Lo because he has been such a good leader this year, and he has had such, impactful stretches. And like, I said before the season, with you on this show, that I thought D'Angelo Russell getting traded was the safest bet in the NBA this year. And I'm actually surprised that it's only 60% at this point, but I think you and I would agree, like 6 games since joining the starting lineup, 27-7 on 50-50-90. Like the dude's hooping right now. And I think that that's kind of added a little bit of a question mark to it. But I think when the cooler heads prevail, everyone's going to remember that's the best option.